Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Judy Geller, Director of METALCON, and I'm delighted to welcome you today to METALCON Live. I'm here with Kaylin Burke, who's at the controls as usual. Today, METALCON, in partnership with the Metal Construction Association, brings you residential re-roofing with metal. Todd Miller, president of Isaiah Industries, will be the presenter. For many years, metal has been outpacing other materials in terms of growth, and Todd is going to dig into what contractors and architects both need to know to ensure success in residential metal roofing. Before we start, if your company is not yet a member of the Metal Construction Association, now is a great time to join. Benefits include exclusive access to technical reports, research data, industry information, and more. And plus, you get a great discount if you exhibit at METALCON. To learn more, please contact Jeff Irwin. You can see his contact information on this slide. Just a couple other quick reminders before I turn things over to Todd. METALCON 2022 registration is now open. The Super Show for Metal and Construction and Design will feature hundreds of exhibits, all new education and networking, a newly developed program for young professionals age 40 and younger who are ready to grow their careers. We have a new metal building system marketplace and so much more. We are also bringing back the Architects Experience at METALCON. If you missed it last year, this is a show within a show exclusively for architects, designers, specifiers, and engineers who are eager to bring new life into projects, wow clients, and solve a wide variety of design, structural, and environmental challenges all through the use of metal. We're excited to be producing the Architects Experience this year in partnership with AEC Daily, one of the largest providers of continuing education in the built industry. Finally, if you need technical help, reach out to METALCON support in the chat box, and don't forget to complete the post-webinar survey to earn your AIA LUs for today's session. And without further ado, let's turn it over to you, Todd.
Hey, thanks so much, Judy. Pleasure to be here today, and thank you everyone for taking the time to attend today. And I want to give a big shout out to Judy and Kaylin and all the others at METALCON for all the great hard work that they're putting in to prepare for a great METALCON this October in Indianapolis. I know that we're looking forward to it and looking forward to seeing hopefully lots of you folks there as well, because I know it's going to be a great show. I'm excited about it. It's going to be a good one. So thanks again. So let's go ahead and jump into this. I'm going to share my screen and we'll make this happen. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen at this point, which is just the title page for residential re-roofing with metal. So let's dig right into it. If I can get my slides to advance. Okay, we're going to try this one more time. My apologies, not sure what happened there. This worked fine in rehearsal, I promise.
It definitely did. Todd, if you want to go ahead and, oh, there we go. You got it.
Let's try this one more time. No, my problem was just it wasn't. There we go. Okay, it wasn't advancing slides for me, so my apologies. Here we go. So we want to dig in and take a look at what the market size is, and this is fairly brief. I'm keeping it pretty simple, but just to give folks an idea of what's happening out there with residential roofing and re-roofing in particular. So in 2020, there are not any numbers in yet for 2021, but these numbers are according to Dodge reports. There were 145 million squares of residential re-roofing done in 2020. On top of, and this is all products. On top of that, you had about 30 million squares of roofing that were also residential, but they were new construction. Out of those numbers, so out of the 145, about 21.5 million squares of that were metal. And the thing to really notice, I think, is the fact that that number was up from 16.4 million just 5 years earlier in 2015. And the statistics also show that about 1 million squares of metals being used in residential new construction each year. So let's look at how that market share changed during those 5 years. Metal actually increased from 11% to 15%, which is a very healthy growth. Part of that growth came at the expense of asphalt shingles that dropped from 78 to 75, which has shown an ongoing trend that goes back even earlier than the 5 years. Tile has been steady throughout that period at about a 5% share. And during that 5 years, we saw polymer products, composite plastic products, grow from about 0% 5 years ago to about 1% at this point. So what this ultimately makes us is metal roofing is one of the fastest growing segments of what we call residential replacement products. So over the years, you've had a lot of other products that have been replacement products in the residential market, be that exterior cladding or windows or doors or garage doors, and of course, then on into kitchens and baths. Those are all things that at some point as a homeowner you have to replace. Well, if you look at all of those, metal roofing is one of the fastest growing segments of that sort of industry. So you have to ask yourself, well, why is metal on the rise? Why is this happening? And, you know, as someone who's been in the industry at this point now for over 40 years, I've seen a number of things that I think are driving this growth. One is that property owners are frustrated by the performance of standard shingles and other roofing choices they have, and they're looking for products with long-term value. And we typically see this too. If length of home ownership goes out a little bit longer, homeowners get a little bit more serious about products that they know they will not have to replace. I think another thing that's happening is, you know, we're seeing, especially in recent years, but even going back further than that, we're seeing rapidly increasing costs and materials, labor, energy to fuel, heat, and air condition our homes. And I think those costs are causing homeowners to also seek ways of controlling what that cost is of maintaining and operating their home. We're also seeing a lot of consumers increasingly who are looking for the best environmental choice when it comes to their home. So they look at metal roofing with its sustainability and its energy efficiency and its recycled content, and that's very appealing to them. I think some of the other benefits, of course, as we see more extreme weather patterns developing and emerging in many parts of the country, we're seeing homeowners who are looking for more resilient materials. That would be fire safe materials in the fire prone areas, low weight materials in areas that are prone to seismic activity, of course, wind resistance for hurricane or tornado prone areas. And of course, no one's going to hardly ever complain about simply a product that is lower maintenance. Finally, I think homeowners are also looking for increased curb appeal and lasting home value. And that's kind of what I call the HGTV culture that we live in. Everyone is thinking more and more about those aesthetics of their home, and they want it to not only embody, you know, who they are as a person, but they also want it to be attractive to others and something that, you know, would help them if they ever go to sell the home. So all that basic information about the growth of the industry aside, I want to take a look at what architects, specifiers, home improvement contractors, roofing contractors, let's look at what they need to know about metal roofing. So as you get more and more folks asking you about metal roofing, what are some of the basic things that you need to know and be able to talk about? And additionally, what are some of the things that you can really dig into in order to make yourself a recognized expert in this field? So let's look first at installing over existing shingles. In most areas of the country, code does allow for new roofs of any type, for the most part, to be installed over one layer of existing shingles. Metal roofs generally are very adaptable for going over a layer of existing shingles, except for standing seam. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But standing seam, if it doesn't go over a pretty flat, even surface, you do run a risk of forcing rippling, or what the industry calls oil canning, into those panels. And you're going to hear me say this next sentence some other times as well, but it's always important to check on local code requirements, building code requirements, as well as the manufacturer recommendations. Another thing I wanted to note was that on insurance re-roofs, so let's say a roof's been hailed out or somehow damaged, insurance is replacing it. Insurance is probably going to require those old shingles to be removed rather than go over them in most states. However, again, our industry's feeling is, and I've been involved with metal roof installations over existing shingles for 40 years. I have yet to go back on a job where I said, gee whiz, I wish we would have taken off the old shingles. I haven't had that happen in 40 years and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of installations. But leaving the old shingles obviously helps to reduce some costs for the homeowner. It helps reduce liability for the contractor and time you have to spend on the job. It helps to reduce burdening our landfills with old torn off shingles. And ultimately, it's not significant, but it does add some R value to that building envelope in terms of energy efficiency. So let's skip ahead and look at fire classifications. Metal roofing is generally recognized and respected as being non-combustible. What you will find is most metal roof products will have their own UL listings and fire classifications. General rules for that, again, always check with local code requirements and local building code prescriptive, what they prescribe. But code will generally provide a Class A classification to steel and copper roofs, and then aluminum roofs, which have a lower melting point, will often have to have fire rated underlayments in order to achieve a Class A classification, or sometimes even a Class B. So those are important things to know based upon what the required fire classification is in your area. So next, I want to look at some generalities of the styles of metal roofing that are being used in the residential arena today, and also what the minimum pitch requirements are for the application of those various styles. So let's look at some general rules first. First of all, never install a product on lower pitches recommended by the manufacturer. As a manufacturer, I have seen people try to install roofs on below pitch installations. Believe me, if a manufacturer felt that their product could be installed on that pitch, they would tell you it could be installed on that pitch. Just like you, we love to sell products. Never install it at a pitch lower than recommended by the manufacturer. No matter how brilliant you may think you are that you can make it be watertight, don't try it. It will eventually fail. And I've got lots of stories where I can show that to you. Some products will have an option of butyl sealant in the overlap between the panels, or perhaps the interlock between the panels, to enable lower pitch installation. So that is a topic you can bring up with the manufacturer. Okay, I understand your minimum pitch is 212. Is there any way I can make this work on a 1 3/4 12? And if the manufacturer has a way to do that, they will share that with you. I encourage that interaction always between contractors and suppliers or manufacturers. Generally speaking, there is no maximum pitch on these products. And additionally, I want to mention that many of these products can be used on walls. And as we're seeing a lot of creativity being done with exteriors of buildings and cladding on buildings, we're seeing more and more roof panels be used on walls. My wife and I recently used flooring tile on walls in our house, inside the house. But the photo here you see on the left shows a couple of metal panels, both a metal shingle and a vertical metal panel at the top being used on a side wall. So that's being done increasingly. So let's dig into the various common types of metal panels that are being used residentially. First are exposed fastener panels. These are also called corrugated profiles. These are typically steel. You would not usually see these being done in aluminum. Not out of the question, but with the extra expansion and contraction coefficient of aluminum, generally with the exposed fasteners, these are done in steel. These panels have a simple overlap side to side. And generally speaking, minimum required pitch is 212. However, again, check with the individual manufacturer, especially if they have butyl sealant in the overlap. I have seen manufacturers encourage the use of these products on lower pitch roofs as well, even roofs down to 112 or lower. So next, I want to look at standing seam. By definition, standing seam metal roofing consists of interlocking panels with concealed fasteners. As I touched on earlier, these products have to have a pretty flat surface to install them. So generally speaking, most folks will say not to put standing seam over old shingles because doing so can force ripples into the metal, something that we also call oil canning. And that's actually a topic that I will be covering at METALCON in October in one of our educational conferences, seminars. So I hope to see you there, and we'll talk a lot more about oil canning. So generally speaking, in standing seam, though, there are two general types. One is called snap lock, and one is called mechanically seamed. Let's take a quick look at both of those. If, as you see here, those top two images, the one to the left on the top is a concealed clip that would be used in a standing seam system to secure it to the roof deck. And to the right is top right is a common profile of a snap lock standing seam where that clip would be, if you will, inserted between those two pieces that you see. On the bottom right photo, that is what we call a nail hem standing seam. So if you kind of turn your head sideways, that kind of looks like a piece of vinyl siding. And, that's the general concept. So you've got a nail hem with slotted holes up one side of the panel, and the next panel just comes in and snaps down over it. Minimum pitch on standing seam generally is 212. Again, check with the manufacturer. One thing that does come into play on standing seam is how high that seam is. So the taller the seam is, and typically we'll see seams residentially, we'll see seams being used from about 1 inch to 1 3/4 inch. Obviously, a 1 3/4 inch tall seam is going to ultimately be more watertight than a 1-inch seam. So that's something to look at. Also, as you get into standing seam as a contractor or a designer, you do want to think about how water travels on the roof. And so if you've got upper roof levels that dump water on lower roof levels, and you aren't going to have water going to go, and am I directing it all into just one panel where it may flood out that panel? So there are a number of things to think about. One of the things that I think is great about our industry is you'll find that the manufacturers are happy to come alongside you and help take a look at jobs and analyze them a bit and figure out what will and will not work. But again, with standing seam, these are both technically snap locks, but one is clip fastened and one has the nail hem, but they both, along with the definition of standing seam, have concealed fasteners. So let's look at mechanically seamed standing seams. So when I go into perhaps a shopping center or a Walmart, maybe a church, a lot of times there's a very low slope metal roof above me, and that is what we call mechanically seamed. These can be used on roof pitches as low as 0.25 and 12, 1/4 and 12. So basically the panels are put on the roof. They are secured using hidden clips, and then a seaming machine or equipment, old school, they use tongs to close up those seams and actually crimp the seams tight. So a mechanically seamed standing seam, you could literally have water ponding on the roof, and it's going to be held out. So it's a completely watertight system. I love this photo. I think this is might be a Peterson job, but you've got some arched panels there on the back on this contemporary home. And then there on the lower right of the home, you also have a rounded roof section as well. And I'm not sure, I believe those are probably tapered panels in there. So beautiful, beautiful job. Hopefully I'm showing you a few beautiful jobs here in this presentation. So let's look at the final type of metal product being used residentially, and that's what we call modular panels. And modular panels are oftentimes designed to look like something else. So they may be designed to look like shingle, shake, slate, tile. They're basically facsimile products. So these are for homeowners who have heard this great stuff about metal roofing. They want the benefits of metal roofing, but they're saying, I don't know if I like the looks of a lot of the metal roofs I see, or they may say, you know, I like that look on a contemporary house, but it's not going to look right on my house. So that oftentimes is where the modular panels come into play. A nice benefit to modular panels too is that they are easier and less costly to ship than the long vertical panels. So standing seam, and to a large degree even through fastened panels these days, are produced regionally. You also have some large national manufacturers that may service large areas or the entire country, but you also have a lot of regional manufacturers. And the whole point there is to get the manufacturing closer to the consumer in order to help bring down some of those shipping costs of the long panels. But the nice thing about the modular panels is they come in cardboard cartons, and they're stretch wrapped to pallets generally. So they're very easily shipped by LTL carriers, frequently shipped across the country. So when you get into metal shingles, you typically, you know, you've got a number of national manufacturers rather than a larger number of regional manufacturers. Now, generally with these modular panels, most of them are installed direct to deck over solid decking. We will talk more about that in a bit. But a few of these products also require battens. So especially when you get into some of the stone-coated steel products, they actually have to have battens on the roof, and they fasten to the battens. Generally speaking, on modular panels, the minimum pitch is usually 312. Something to think about on that, though. So the photo here that you see is actually an aluminum panel that's designed to look like cedar shake. Well, each course of those panels has 12-inch exposure, and they've got a raised butt thickness on each course of 1.25 inches. So when you think about it, it's the panel itself is creating a negative 1.25 to 12 pitch. And so that's, again, one of the reasons why we really require the 312 pitch. Kaylin, do we have a question?
We do have a question. This is coming from David Brown. Of total metal re-roof markets, what are the percentage breakouts of exposed fastener versus standing seam versus modular panels?
I don't have those exact figures in front of me, David. Those are some figures that the Metal Roofing Alliance has from our Dodge report. Certainly, through fastened and standing seam are the lion's share of the market. The modular panels are a fairly small share of the market, probably around 10 or 12%. But the whole market in general is growing. Again, David, if you want to reach out to me, I'll show my email address at the end. We do have those numbers. I just don't have the exact figures at my fingertip. We actually even have them broken out by region of the country as well.
Oh, wow. Perfect. Well, sounds like you've got some fantastic info for us. Thanks, Todd.
Thank you. Thanks for popping in there. So that kind of wraps up our modular panels and the three general types of metal roofs, which would be through fastened, standing seam. You got a couple types of standing seam, and then the modular panels. So let's look next at the metals. What type of metals are used in metal roofing today? And I'm going to keep this pretty simple. I mean, I could talk about metals all day, but let's look very simply at the four general types of metal that are probably most commonly used in residential metal roofing. One is steel, and in steel we have both galvanized and galvalume. Now, the galvanized has primarily a zinc coating on it for corrosion resistance. The galvalume has primarily an aluminum coating on it for corrosion resistance. Uh, Typically, what we see is if a panel is more heavily formed or textured, it's probably going to have galvanized on it, whereas other panels will probably have galvalume or be made from galvalume metal. We also then see that these products are usually either painted or sometimes they are stone coated as well. Back up here real quick. So I did just see a question come in from Justin, and I apologize, Kaylin. The question did pop up, so let me go ahead and cover it. Can you do standing seam with 26 gauge? Yeah. So typically you'll see most residential standing seam either in 24, 25, or 26 gauge. I'm going to talk a little bit later about metal thickness. So we'll save that for just a moment. But the answer is yes, that is a pretty common thickness in standing seam. Another metal that is commonly used is aluminum. Aluminum is what I call ultra low weight. It's even lower weight than steel. Aluminum has the benefit of, even without any sort of galvanization on top of it, it will not rust. So we frequently see aluminum used in marine environments. And aluminum roofing, like steel roofing we talked about earlier, is usually going to be painted. Well, then we get into two metals that are typically not painted, being copper and zinc. These are both higher end metals. Copper, of course, is known for its characteristic color. You see here in this photo is a copper shake, actually. And of course, eventually that will develop the characteristic verdigris green patina that copper is known for. But typically we'll see copper used as standing seam or sometimes as shingles. And then zinc is a silver gray metal. Zinc has been very common in Europe over the years, but we're increasingly seeing it used here in North America, especially on what I call monumental buildings, government buildings, churches, very prestigious sort of buildings. Zinc is oftentimes standing seam, though can also be fabricated into shingles. One thing on zinc is it does require a rain screen or a drainage plane behind the zinc, because you do not want to trap moisture between the zinc and the roof deck, as that moisture will cause corrosion of the zinc over time. So let's take a moment here and look at each of these metals in terms of their recycled content. This is certainly a benefit that oftentimes folks are looking for in terms of looking at the green aspect of roofing. Steel and copper typically have 35% recycled metal content. Aluminum kind of leads the pack at 95%. And so what this makes is metal roof can be a significant way in which property owners can close the recycling loop. We all carry our recyclables out to the curb. I had to do mine this morning, but yet as homeowners, what can we really buy that closes that loop? Well, metal roofing is one of those things. Hi, you're back.
Hi, I am back. We have a new question coming in from Sylvia Dyson. What is the most common metal used on the residential market?
Oh, well, a good question, Sylvia. It certainly is steel, no doubt about it. And I would say it's probably more galvalume rather than galvanized. A lot of times on that, though, you're looking at the particular application, what metal is going to serve that area of the country best, but you're also looking to a large degree at the panel being formed. So as I mentioned earlier, a more heavily formed product typically would be galvanized rather than galvalume. As I mentioned earlier, aluminum might be used in coastal areas. Copper might be used for a more prestigious sort of design element to this home as well. But yeah, I would say the bulk of product being sold today is galvalume.
Perfect. Thanks very much.
Sure. So let's look at metal thickness. So we had been asked about that earlier. One of the things I want to point out is that metal roofing products are performance tested. So that means the manufacturer has to go out and have their products tested for uplift resistance, for durability, for fire safety, fire resistance. And then you have to meet certain codes. And one of the reasons I say this is a manufacturer could make a relatively light gauge product and by engineering and design make it perform better than a heavy gauge product. So I encourage folks, don't get too caught up on metal thickness, again, because the products are all designed and then performance tested to ensure that they're going to do what they need to do. One of the things that you do get into, and we touched on earlier, question between 24 or 26 gauge steel standing seam. Someone who works with 24 gauge steel long term is going to look like Popeye. They're going to have huge forearms because it's tough stuff to cut. But again, you can design a 26 gauge product that will also perform. And today we're seeing a number of manufacturers start to delve more into 25 gauge, trying to sort of hit a happy medium there. So more heavily formed products. So if you take something like a metal shingle or a corrugated product where you're putting a lot of strength in the metal by the way you form it, more heavily formed products are generally going to use thinner metal. Another thing I want to point out is that aluminum and copper are measured in decimal thickness, while many still use gauge for steel. I'm not a fan of gauge because there are huge tolerances on gauge. I prefer to even refer to steel in terms of decimal thickness, but much of the industry does still use gauge references for steel thickness. So let's look quickly at coatings, the types of coatings used on metal roofs. You're going to run into three general types of coatings on products that are coated. Again, copper and zinc and some other products are natural metals, so they are not coated. But on coated products, you've got polyester coatings are kind of the entry level, and you will find a variety of chemistries of polyester coatings, and there could be some differences in terms of performance between those chemistry. These products are very common on exposed fastener panels, but we also see them sometimes on standing seam and even on some of the modular panels. Then we also have PVDF coatings. These are pretty common on the higher quality standing seam and modular panel products. PVDF coatings, which are also sold under the trade names of Kynar 500 and Hylar 5000, are known for superior fade and chalk resistance. And finally, that photo in the upper right corner is an aggregate or stone coating, which is used on steel modular panels. Creates a nice attractive look. I always tell consumers a stone coated steel roof is kind of a nice bridge for, because it gives you a look to what you're accustomed to with asphalt, but yet you pick up many of the benefits of metal roofing or steel roofing in particular. Let's look at underlayment. Again, always adhere to code requirements as well as manufacturer recommendation. Generally speaking, a lot of the industry in terms of underlayment is using the premium grade synthetic underlayments. You can generally know a premium grade product that it's going to weigh about 38 pounds per 10 square roll. Some of the more economical grades will weigh more in the 28 to 30 pound range. If ice and water shield is used, especially if it has to be used by according to building code, it should be a high temp formulation. Ice and water shield or any underlayment should always have a smooth top surface. You don't want to use a rough granulated top surface that's going to rub against the backside of the metal. Also, and I interpret the ICC building code as requiring this, but I also just think it's a good idea. Underlayment should be used even if the old shingles are left in place. You should be covering those old shingles with a new underlayment. I would caution folks, and I believe that anyone who manufactures ice and water shield or self-adhering underlayment will say the same thing. Caution folks on using self-adhering on the entire house unless that attic is vented per code or even to exceed code. Ice and water shield on an entire roof surface seals things up like a terrarium and can potentially contribute to condensation issues, again, unless that structure is extremely well ventilated. So let's look at ventilation. By the way, there's a previous METALCONLive recorded webinar out there on the subject of ventilation and condensation. It's very comprehensive. I'd encourage you, if that subject is of interest to you, go out and check out that webinar as well. Generally speaking, metal roofs are very similar to other residential roofs, and you got to vent them according to code, and you're going to do that in similar ways to how you would with other roofs. Keep in mind, though, that dew point is what we're thinking about. Dew point is a combination of ambient moisture and temperature differential. So I think of that cold glass of iced tea. I take it outside on a warm, muggy day, and instantly I have caused condensation on the outside of that glass. That's dew point, and that's not something you want to happen inside of a structure. Generally speaking, metal roofs don't really contribute to condensation in structures, except metal roofs that have great deal of contact with the roof deck, such as a exposed fastener or standing seam where you've got a lot of direct contact. Those will drop the roof deck temperature, and they may drop the roof deck temperature enough that it becomes the straw that breaks the camel's back, causes condensation in an attic that previously had never had condensation. So that is something to think about. Again, great webinar out there about that. The concern with metal roofing and condensation, though, is far more about reaching dew point and getting condensation on the underside of the roof deck in the attic than it is with any remote chance of condensation on the direct underside of the metal panels themselves. Again, every job should have some thought given to it in terms of thermal dynamics. Don't want to ever do something to a house that's going to cause problems. Again, talking with manufacturers can be a great way to pick up some information that you need and to get some advice on projects. So I see this from someone asking, where do you see the old ventilation webinar? Yes, if you go to YouTube and you search METALCONLive condensation, you will pull up that video pretty easily. So
Absolutely. I just sent the full link.
Awesome, thank you. So these are just some photos. You see my glass of iced tea. I just took it outside and it's got condensation on it immediately. Here in the middle photo, you see a metal panel that is exposed in the attic. It has condensation on it. On the far right, we see a OSB deck that obviously has had condensation and now it has mold and mildew on it. These are things we don't want to have happen. So we encourage everyone to always individually. Looks like we may have another question here.
We
Oh,
do.
they said thanks. Well, you're welcome. Awesome.
So what are the most, we have another question coming in from David Brown. What are the most common types of ventilation products used on metal roofs?
Good question. And so if you look at this image here, it does show a ridge vent. This is actually drawn with standard asphalt shingles, but on every job, you want to think about the ventilation in the attic, and many contractors will do an attic inspection and ventilation inspection as they sell jobs, just to make sure that they're doing things right. And maybe the home needs a ventilation package in addition to a roof. So you're always looking at the ventilation as far as how much ventilation is there enough, and is it functioning? Is it not blocked by insulation? So David, to answer your question, most metal roofs, if you contact the manufacturer, most metal roofs will have a ridge vent option. A lot of the metal shingles can also work well with the standard slant back, turtle vents, square vents. Another option too would be power vents and power fans. I'm involved in a project right now, and we looked at this thing and we decided it really needed power fans. So we're putting power vents in for the exhaust vents. So big question that always comes up is, do we do strapping battens on the roof, or do we do direct to deck? Big caution against installing where the underside of the metal is exposed in the attic. That's going to end up with a situation similar to that photo I showed earlier, where you're going to have moisture trying to drive out of the structure, and it's going to hit that cool backside of the metal roof, and it's going to condense. So you don't want to do that. You always want to adhere to manufacturer recommendations. Most residential applications out there do not use strapping. Now you get into certain geographic areas and it's just been the way they do things, and they do use strapping, but the reality is it's usually not helpful. It does make the roof harder to walk. It can also decrease wind resistance. However, if you've got situations where you've got very limited ventilation, if you have situations up north where you're getting ice dams on the roof because of heat escaping from the home, and you're not able to take care of that by sealing and different things to keep the heat in the home, then purlins and getting the metal roof up off the deck can sometimes be beneficial. You can actually cross batten, meaning you put vertical battens down first as sleepers along the rafters, and then horizontal battens, and you actually actively vent that resulting chamber. Also, in some cases, breathable underlayments and tangled mesh products can be beneficial as well. So here on the bottom left is an entangled mesh that would be put on top of the underlayment, and then the metal would be installed on top of that. Just gives an extra thermal break or air gap there. Upper left, we see a job that's being prepared for either cross battens or decking to be put down, where they're actually going to be doing above sheathing ventilation and venting those chambers. And that's because this was in an area where, as I recall, they were getting a lot of ice dams on the roof, which you see there in the photo to the right as well. So let's skip ahead to weight. Metal is a low weight option. Low weight roofing products simplify installation, make things easier for your crews. They also reduce the ultimate stress on a structure, which can be important as structures are getting older and older. Weight comparisons, aluminum products weigh about 50 to 70 pounds per square, 100 square feet. Steel weighs about 80 to 125. Copper and zinc would be on the high end of that at 100 to 125. Polymer or plastic roofing products typically in the 180 to 350 range. Asphalt shingles typically 250 to 375. Wood shingles 300 to 450. And then of course cement, slate, and tile are the heavyweights and could be any place from 500 pounds a square on up to pushing out toward 2,000 pounds a square. So I want to look at energy efficiency. It's an important benefit of metal roofing, been widely recognized, written up a lot, widely recognized by energy methods. Heat is transferred by radiation, conduction, and convection. Metal roofs can address all three of these, which is pretty interesting. So let's look at radiant heat transfer. Radiant heat is the heat that passes right through materials and then radiates off of materials. So good example, a brick or stucco home sits in the hot sun all day. I can go out there at midnight and still feel the heat radiating off the brick home. So that kind of gives you an idea of what radiant heat is. Radiant heat is also, I go up and stand next to a window and I feel the heat coming right through the glass and warming the air around me. So to block radiant heat, light colors are certainly beneficial. But also many of today's painted metal roofs have reflective pigments in their coatings so that we are reflecting radiant heat even in dark colors. Now you still get better reflectivity out of, say, white than you do a reflective brown, but you're getting far better reflectivity out of the reflective brown than we used to get out of non-reflective paints. Radiant barriers, because many metal roofs have air gaps built into the system, radiant barriers can be incorporated for enhanced energy efficiency. This blocking heat transfer, blocking radiant heat transfer is largely where metal roofing has made its claim in terms of energy efficiency. So this is what has been documented by Energy Star. Of course, the Energy Star roofing program is being phased out here shortly, just because they began to realize that all metal roofs generally were pretty energy efficient. CRC is another organization that has done a lot of research or a lot of verification into radiant heat blocking with metal roofs. Next, let's look at conductive heat transfer. Conductive heat transfer is when one material touches another, it conducts heat to it. I put a metal panel, a metal roof panel out in the sun, it's going to get hot. But if that metal panel is designed with a thermal break, which in essence is a dead air space between the metal and the roof deck, I'm going to block that conductive heat transfer. So this photo here is of a steel product designed to look like cedar shake. It actually, underneath almost all the panels, has an air gap of about an inch. And so that air gap acts as a thermal break to block conductive heat transfer. So metal shingles, by their design, naturally block conductive heat transfer. But we're also doing things like putting standing seams panels on clips, special clips that get the metal up off the roof deck, or perhaps using battens or strapping like we talked about in order to get that metal up off the roof deck and stop conductive heat transfer. These thermal breaks can also help to avoid condensation in the attic by separating the metal from the roof deck, and they can also actually help to prevent ice dams by keeping that heat that is trying to drive out of the house from reaching the metal skin on the roof. Finally, we have convective heat transfer, and metal roofs can also address this through their use of ventilation, as we've talked about. So convective heat transfer is the principle that warm air rises. It's important to keep in mind that warm air carries moisture in it. So as that warm air rises in a structure, if that warm air hits a cold surface, it's going to force the moisture out of the air, which in turn is going to cause condensation. So metal roofs, of course, can take advantage of convective heat flow by using a variety of roof ventilation techniques. Bottom line is every home is going to have its own energy dynamics, but energy savings generally are reported by homeowners of 20% and even sometimes up to 35%. Based upon that particular home and maybe other things that were done as well. I mean, again, I wanted to point out that sometimes the metal roofing contractor also takes it upon their initiative to make sure that the ventilation is functioning well, and ventilation functioning well is going to go a long way also in terms of making that roof system in that home be more energy efficient. So finally, and we're getting close to the end here, I want to look at solar readiness. It's that metal roof customers and solar customers typically have very similar goals. They want to do something good for the environment, but they also want to reduce their costs of operating their home. So what we frequently see is folks will put a metal roof on, and maybe 5 years later, 10 years later, they've saved up some money. Now they want to put solar on it. And we see this happen very, very regularly. Metal makes a good, stable base for solar. And the nice thing is that because metal doesn't soften or become brittle or age badly, it's going to make just as good of a base for solar installation 10 years, 20 years after it was installed as it would have when it was first installed. So again, it goes well with that idea of I'll invest in a metal roof now, I'll put solar on once I get some money saved up. Great ways to put solar on metal roofs. Traditional solar panels, PV panels, can be clamped to standing seam roofs using things like the S5 clamps and others, so that you don't have to put many penetrations through the roof. Basically no penetrations for fastening, just penetrations for wiring. Metal shingles also have a variety of brackets that can be used. Those brackets do have fasteners going through the metal shingle, but the good brackets are designed to cover that fastener or cover that lag screw very well. Metal shingles can also have optional foam backers installed behind them in those areas where solar might be installed. And so that makes that roof solar ready because that area of the roof where the foam backers have been used is now ready to handle the weight and the foot traffic of a solar installation. So here we have a couple of photos, a metal shingle on the right with brackets mounting solar panels onto it. On the left are solar panels on a standing seam roof where you can see they have clamped onto the ribs. And again, they've been able to put the solar on without any significant penetration through the roof. So that's actually, I'm to the point of asking if we have any questions or any additional questions. I may have seen someone raise their hand, but I think they may have put it back down.
We do have one hand raised from Harold Beck, and I'll go ahead and let Harold talk. So he is allowed to speak. Now, Harold, do you have a question for us today? Okay, that's okay, Harold. No
Maybe
worries there.
It's like in school, Harold had to go to the restroom, so he was looking for that hall pass or something. I don't know.
There we go. That makes sense too. So while we're wrapping up here, are there any other questions that are going to come through? I'm not seeing. Oh, I do have one that just came through from a Nicole Snyder. The AIA has the misconception that aluminum building products are carbon intensive. A quote from their website reads, "Architects can minimize embodied carbon by focusing their efforts on the top 3 worst offenders, concrete, steel, and aluminum, which account for 22% of all embodied CO2. How can we get these stakeholders to understand that aluminum roofing typically contains 95% recycled content and the energy efficiencies of all metal roofs?"
You know, it's a great question, and I have seen that concern come up before. I'm actually going to be having a discussion with the executive director of the Aluminum Association in a week or two. I'm actually recording a podcast with him and also the COO of one of the leading aluminum producers. So I will be sure to bring that question up with them. It's a great question.
Absolutely.
And I do know the Aluminum Association just commissioned a study that's taking a look at the use of aluminum in construction. I will say, frankly, I think for a number of years, they weren't really considering themselves to be a viable material for construction, but that seems to be changing. So Nicole, thank you for that question and that reminder. And I will push ahead on that. It's a good question.
Fantastic. I'll also mention we do have a speaker coming to MetalCon that will be speaking exclusively on embodied carbon and various metal products. So just in case you plan on coming, you can always see that course as well. We do have 2 more questions for you, Todd, that have come through. The next one is coming in from Andrew Else. Is there a strong vertical standing seam roof that can span across purlins on pre-engineered buildings?
Uh, yeah, Andrew. I mean, I think what you're talking about there is, and I did not get into this because generally speaking, it would not fall into use on a residential job. But I think what you're talking there is a structural standing seam. Everything that we've looked at here so far today has been architectural products, which means they're non-structural, meaning they have to have decking. But yes, there are structural standing seams out there. You might want to investigate MBMA, the Metal Building Manufacturers Association. Andrew would probably be a great resource for you. But yes, what you want to search for, though, is structural standing seam.
Fantastic. What is the name of the podcast, Todd, that of the podcast that you will be speaking with the Aluminum Association with? And what date will that be aired?
Hi, Leanne. That is on our Construction Disruption podcast, and we are set to record that around June 2nd. Right as I got on this, I got a note. I think they need to reschedule for a different date, but we're going to be recording it sometime in early June. So it will probably be published to the Construction Disruption podcast probably early to mid-July. We're usually running about 6 weeks out on episodes.
Fantastic. Well, let us know when that happens. We'll make sure to watch it. All of us will.
Cool.
Okay, I do have one more question for you coming from an anonymous attendee. What are the typical alloys used in aluminum products and common gauges?
So the alloy that is probably most common is 3105 because it is a recycled content alloy, and recycled aluminum works extremely well for building products. So it's probably 3105. We also see some, I believe it's 5002, which is more of a virgin alloy. Far as gauges, usually on aluminum shingles, again, we refer to aluminum in decimal thickness, not gauge, but on aluminum shingles, we're usually in the 019 to 024 range. For aluminum standing seam, it's typically 032 or 040 for architectural products. And then for structural standing seam, it's typically 040 to 050 thickness.
Perfect. I haven't seen any other questions come through. So I'll take this moment to say thank you so much for joining us, Todd. We so appreciate it. And we look forward to hearing that podcast you've got coming out with the Aluminum Association. That'll be fantastic. And we also look forward to seeing you at METALCON this year, coming up October 12th through the 14th. I hope everyone who is listening will be able to join us there. And thank you all for watching today. We appreciate all of your good questions, all of your fantastic participation. And we look forward to seeing you at our future METALCON Live coming up on June 8th. Thank you again, Todd. We hope you have a great rest of your day and have a good day to everybody else. Have a great start of your summer. Bye, y'all.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye.